So we just wrapped up day 2 of the recording session with Crankwalk, and as I said, I'm going to be here every day this week showing how we record from start to finish a band session in my studio. And we began today with a little bit of drums. It was actually a live full band session, and then we moved on to tracking guitars. Now, the two guitarists in Crankwalk are both brothers. Shout out to you boys, Monty and Toby, and being brothers, they have this real connection when they play guitar. And they actually prefer to play guitar together. And I'm going to show you how we made that work in the studio in a second, but just make sure that you don't forget to hit like and subscribe and share the video and show people the awesome content we're creating on this channel. It goes a long way to help us growing and just making more content. That's enough jibber jabbering on. Let's get on the tools. Behind me, we have the guitarist from Crankwalk's 2 different guitar heads. One is like a solid state Marshall and the other one is a Mesa stack. And, you know, 2 different amp sounds, but the guys have their own slightly different tones that they're pulling, and, you know, they do their thing and they do it very well. And the Marshall is on a Marshall stack, and then the Mesa is actually going to my 2x12, which has a Celestian greenback and a vintage 30 in it, and we went with the vintage 30. And I'll show you how we mic'd up both of these cabs. So on both cabinets, we have the same setup. We have an SM57 and an RM5 ribbon mic. And on my 2x12, same deal. That's the greenback speaker there being mic'd up for the Mesa. And as you might be able to see on this Marshall, both microphones are in between the center of the cone and the edge of the cone. And that's kind of where I like to put a 57. I find it's a bit too shrill when it's right on the dust cap. That's just my preference, and that's how I dial in my tones. And I mentioned earlier that Toby and Monty both like to play at the same time when they're recording guitars. They feel more comfortable that way, and unfortunately they'd had experiences before where they'd asked if in studio sessions they could record at the same time with their amps, and they were actually told no. And you know, in a bigger studio, this shouldn't really be a problem. In my studio, it's a small room. So what I've done is mic up the furthest speakers away from one another. I'm using ribbons, which are going to reject each other from the sides. And then 57s have a pretty good off-axis rejection as well. And yeah, there might be some cross-bleed from amp to amp, but I really do find it's minimal. And I'll show you in a second how much bleed we actually get with them sitting right next to each other in this small room. You'd be surprised how little it is. And for me personally, like, whilst I understand you might want to avoid potential phase issues and, you know, other complications that might arise from having 2 speakers together, what is actually more important is that the performers are comfortable and playing in the way that suits them best to get the best performance and then therefore the best recording. Let's just say you do separate these 2 guys and you make them play separately from one another. You won't get a good performance potentially, and then your mic setup and the phase issues are kind of moot. Whereas I'm willing to sacrifice, you know, some of these slight potential issues for a better performance, because what matters most is the artist's ability to play to their best. And if I'm going to get the best performance by doing something, that's probably the choice I'm going to make. Anyway, behind me is the rack gear that I use, and I'll show you how we ran our mics into all this cool outboard right now. So first up, the SM57s went into the VP28 preamps, and then I find those give a really good tonality for guitars. And then next up, they went into the graphic EQs here, the V560s from Z&H Designs. Now, this is where these EQs really excel. They're great on kick, they're great on snare, they're amazing on guitars and very easy for dialing in guitar tones. They're just so excellent at that. So both the 57s are going into those EQs in tracking, and I'll show you how that sounds real soon. The ribbon mics then went into the MP573 Neve clones and were also had a bit of roll off in the tops and the low end frequencies, and that's about it really. And real simple EQ moves on the ribbons. They're there just to add a bit of weight and depth to the guitar tones. And then there's one other thing I can't forget to mention. Each guitar amp has a DI box set up as well, and that's to capture a signal that's great for editing, which I'll show you in our session in a minute. And it's also as a backup, because if we make a mistake on tones, or we do have those issues with phase between the two amps, I have a backup and I can reamp both of these separately from one another later on. Now, I know that that's probably not going to be necessary, but it's always good to have a backup, and the DI gives you a backup. But that's it for the setup of guitars. Let's jump in and see how they actually sound, because that's the most important part. So let's dive in and listen to these guitars. I'm so excited for you to hear them in their raw but amazing sounding versions. And you can see here I have a guitar, DI, a 57 and a ribbon for each of these microphones, and they go to their own bus so I can mix them later, and then they all go to a global guitar bus. Cool, I think you guys get the point, and it's just such a banger of a song. So awesome, those really, really great guitar riffs in there, and building upon that great drum sound that we started with yesterday. As you can see in the mix, the ribbons are quite low in the mix. They're just there to add a bit more oomph in the low frequencies and the low mids, and the 57s are doing most of the heavy lifting. I'll solo those up so you can hear them. So you can see that we're getting this really awesome fat sound just from the SM57s, and that's, them going into a really good pre and then into an amazing EQ. That V560 from Z&H Designs is so incredible on guitars. It's good on lots of things, but guitars, it really, really shines. It's so easy to dial in, just an amazing guitar tone. And, also, I've got to give credit, Toby and Monty also have great guitar tones and great gear, and they know how to play really well. So that goes a long way as well. So let's just remember that too. But yeah, those V560s are doing a great job in just taming that sound of a 57 and really sculpting it. And then I'll show you what the ribbons sound like in behind that. And yeah, you can hear how the kick drum still comes through really well. There's space in the mix for the bass that was still only a scratch track. That's a scratch track, not even the real thing yet. And the mix is really coming along. And just remember, if we look at the session, there is still no EQ to be seen. And it's just that reverb from yesterday and some gates. Like, we're still just coming straight off the desk, straight out of all my hardware, and dialing in tones and getting a great sounding recording using hardware on the way in during tracking. Now, whilst I'm pretty happy with these guitars, I could, and I will do this, I'll add a gentle EQ just to my global guitars, and I'll roll off a bit of extra lows and some of the highs because they can get sizzly and stuff. And there we go, like just really gentle tweaking there, and we can create a little bit more space in the mix for the cymbals and the snare drum, and later on the vocals as well, by just removing some of the highs that we don't need from those guitars, and especially in the palm mutes later on. Like, that low cut will really go a long way into keeping space in the mix for everything else. It doesn't take much. If you record it really well, you end up with a great sounding mix. Let's just hear it one more time.
Like, it's really sounding awesome. And, like, this is why I use hardware, because it gets the production moving faster. It means I have to do a lot less mixing later on. Like, I am going to do mixing on this track, don't get me wrong. There's going to be, fab filter on every one of these channels and a bit of cleaning up, but I'm going to have to do a lot less mixing, and I'm just going to be able to do a lot more creative things in mixing because it already sounds really, really good. And I can't overstate this enough. The performance matters too. And getting back to what I talked about today, the performers, really want to play at the same time because they feel that gives them the best performance, and they feed off each other in this really cool way when they perform together. And it's just, if that's what works and that's what gets the performance and that's what gets the right tones and playing, then that's what I'm going to do. And just to show you, before we go, I will show you the amount of spill that's going on as well, and you can hear how minimal it is. But yeah, you probably didn't even hear anything while I was soloing the guitars. You probably barely noticed. Anyway, I'll solo them up and show you. But before we do that, please hit like down below. Please, if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel. It helps a lot, and it goes a long, long way to just making this channel grow and helping me make more content like this. And don't forget, I'm going to be here every day this week showing this process. While I'm recording this band, I'm staying up extra late, putting my kids to bed, and then staying up until stupid times in the night just to make these videos. So I hope you guys are getting a lot out of it, and thank you for those already that are commenting and joining in the discussion on the previous video. I really, really appreciate it. Anyway, let's give those guitars one more listen. And you can hear some spill there from the other guitar. And over here. Now, in those sections of the song, I might choose to, edit those gaps. I probably will. But, it's not that loud. Like, you can see in the waveforms here, there's spill, but it's nothing that's going to ruin our mix. And I've only got these guitars panned. Where are they roughly panned at the moment? 60. They're not even at the moment. But that might be where I put my verse guitars, and then my choruses, when I split these tracks up to choruses as well, they might go wider in the chorus. We're not getting any imaging problems with the potential phase problems that might come from having the two guitars playing at the same time. We've still got a very definite, like, left and right. And if I pan them all the way out, let's just have a listen to if we hear anything funny there. I think you can all see what I mean. Like, you can hear it in solo if you really have the right spots, but it's not affecting the imaging. There's no phase cancellation affecting the tones in any negative way. It all sounds good. So that's all that matters to me, and we got a great performance today. So hopefully this video and this deep dive into guitar recording has helped some of you out. And if you have any other questions, hit me up in the comment sections down below, or add me on Instagram, or you can email me at mitch@thediyrecordingstudio.com. Thanks to all of you who have tuned in, and stay tuned until tomorrow, where we look at some bass guitar. It's going to be sick. I'll show you how we do that. Hope you enjoyed it. I'm Mitch from the DIYrecordingstudio.com. I'll catch you soon.